what a small town pharmacist taught me about business. Many of the people in my audiences, no matter what the industry or what chair they sit in, struggle with the same things. How to do more with less. How to put 2 weeks worth of work into one. How to be the parent our kid expects us to be, or the person our spouse thought they married. In some of our jobs, we have to bring bad news to people. We have to fix problems we didn't create. How to help when you can't. And for some of us, that puts us in a lonely place sometimes, wondering, what's it all for? Wondering when work became more like work. And sometimes, for me at least, it's in moments like these when I remember a man named Happy Jack. Now, chances are good you didn't know him or even the town where he lived. Chances are good you grew up in different ways and different struggles, but, well, maybe you just have something in common with him. Happy Jack was the pharmacist over in the only drugstore in town. His name was Jack Archer, or known to most of us as Happy Jack, for obvious reasons. I mean, he was happy all the time. Have you ever known anybody like that? Just always happy, sun up to sundown, walking down the street. He was always whistling wherever he went. You would hear that incessant whistle before he even entered the diner, as if his happy was entering before he did. Now, it might not seem like a big deal to us on the outside, but if you could have seen into the window of his childhood, well, happy would not have been a word you would have probably used. And I think it's one thing for a body to be happy when times are good, but when they aren't and you can still find a way back to it, well, I don't know, I think that's pretty special. Now, Jack Archer had spent more than his share of days behind the counter at that pharmacy, standing there in line with his mama, staring at that tall, kind man in the white lab coat behind the counter, the one with the silver hair, who never noticed Mama's torn coat or her growing line of credit. The tall man would always look over the counter right into Jack Archer's eyes, and he would tell him, "Son, you're going to grow up to be a fine young man one day." And little Jack believed him, because nobody had ever called him son. Isn't it amazing the power that our words can have in a simple moment like that? Sometimes I forget. Long after his mother had died, well, Jack would make up reasons to go back to that drugstore, just hang around. Well, he hung around so much, they finally put him to work. And I guess you could say he never left until he became the tall man behind the counter himself. And let me tell you, the day he put on that white lab coat was the day Happy Jack stepped into his purpose. I think that was the moment he got the nickname. As predicted, he did grow up to be a fine young man, and a fine older man as well. Happy Jack was a town fixture. Your kid had the croup, he was there. Pawpaw loses his medication again. Happy Jack to the rescue. No question was too small or too unusual. If you came in once, you were a friend. And just like a bartender on a cruise will remember every face and every drink, well, Happy Jack would remember every person and what ailed them. Sometimes he knew before you did. And then, well, something happened. I mean, we all figured Happy Jack was the kind of man that nothing could get him down. But it did. Something did get him down. Not the kind of something that you notice all at once, but the kind that creeps in day after day, little by little, small enough not to notice until it just is. What happened? Well, I guess if I had to choose one word, I'd say change. New way of doing things. More competition, more regulations. More competitions, more regulations. New faces, neighborhoods not feeling like neighborhoods anymore. Doing things faster, apps and computers, automatic renewals. You can drive up and get your medications. Regulations and more regulations. Working harder to keep up. And while his smile was still there wasn't much happy behind it, if you know what I mean. I mean, he wasn't alone after all. Look at the latest Gallup poll that says over 70% of employees are disengaged or checked out. So it's no wonder that Happy Jack found himself in the same place, starting to wonder, what's the point? And maybe it was time to let someone new take over. He started to feel like he was just going through the motions, like the whole world had passed him by. And when we decide to start going through the motions, well, we stop noticing the beauty around us, which is exactly what happened to Happy Jack. His whole world just turned gray. He started counting the days until retirement. One day, he just stopped whistling. He sat behind that counter and he stopped looking up. But fate, now fate has a way of sending the right person in just the right moment, when you least expect it, wrapped up in a tiny moment you didn't see coming. And so one day, without any explanation to it, Happy Jack just had a feeling. Something in the air forced him behind that counter to stop and look up. And there they were, front of the line, a woman and her kid, a torn coat, a declined credit card, and the wide eyes of a little boy peeking up at that tall man in the white lab coat behind the counter. And Happy Jack recognized that feeling. And one of those moments that I guess you could say was kind of like the present brushing shoulders with the past. A moment so fleeting that many would miss it, but not Happy Jack. For some reason that day, he caught it. And without missing a beat, he leaned over the counter, looked in that little boy's eyes and said, "Son, you're going to grow up to be a fine young man one day." And the little boy believed him, because nobody had ever called him son. That day, a declined card went unnoticed. A little boy met a new hero, and Happy Jack watched a little piece of color come back into his gray world. And that was the day he started looking back up again, listening harder, leaning in more. He stopped going through the motions. He stopped counting the days, started making the days count. Stopped looking at what he couldn't do and couldn't fix and focused on what he could. And boy, did it make all the difference. Sure, there were still people he couldn't help, bad news he had to deliver. Change kept coming, but somehow at the end of the day, they were overshadowed by the good, because he chose to make it so. And that was the day Happy Jack started whistling again. I still remember when Happy Jack died. Oh, he'd been retired for years, finally replaced with a newer model, as he'd say. His funeral, well, on that day, I'm not sure there was ever a day that year when so many stores were closed down, so people could come and pay their respects to a man behind the counter they would never forget, one by one, in the service, in the reception, in the grocery stores, in the newspapers, in the hallways and front walks. For weeks to come, people shared their stories of Happy Jack, his legacy whispered by all who knew him, the man behind the counter. And you know, they didn't talk about the times he messed up. They didn't blame him for the bad news he had to deliver. They didn't associate him with the bad times and the pain in their lives. Far from it, because he wasn't part of their pain story. He was there, happy in it. When people told his story, while every story was different, there were two words in every one, two words that made the difference when people summed up Happy Jack. He cared. Happy Jack taught me that no matter how much the world advances, how much we get buried under regulations replaced by new, better, flashier, more virtual, one thing remains. The ones who stand out in the crowded market above the noise, the ones who get the most business and matter most in the world, are the ones who care and take the time to show it. Big walls, computer screens, clicks and likes, apps and automated renewals, they're just things. But when people are hurting, when people are afraid, when people are sick, they don't want things. They want someone to understand, someone to listen, someone to do more than give them a pill, someone to give them an experience, a human experience, to show they care. The great minds have been predicting our future, saying that we're going to be replaced by digital and virtual. The digital would win over brick and mortar. that the big guys are going to replace the little guys. But I've been reading what now even greater minds are saying, that the digital, the online, the computer-driven forces, they're realizing something. That people want the experience. They want the connection. They want to be noticed. They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They don't always need you to have all the answers. They just need you to know, well, they need to know that you care. They just need you to keep looking up. Somewhere in a town you've probably driven past, there's a corner pharmacy. At first glance, it looks like any you've ever been to before. But look closer, behind the counter. See that tall young man in a lab coat? The one with the kind smile? Yeah, he did grow up to be a fine young man one day. And watch, when it's your turn and you're first in line, I promise, he will look up. Let's stop counting the days and start making the days count. I'm in. Are you?